Welcome back to The Global Gambit, a podcast that looks at the nexus of geopolitics, economics, conflict, and international relations. And we are live at a critical moment where a F-15 US fighter jet has been downed over Iran. And as we speak, a search and rescue operation is ongoing. And now, I'm not going to lie that I'm not an intricate expert of the minute details such as this, but I do know someone who is much better placed to tell us what's going on, how things could play out, and why it all matters, what it means for the broader strategic direction of the war, and that is Aaron David Miller. He's a prominent American Middle East expert and currently senior fellow at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, based in Washington, D.C. Aaron, it's lovely to have you on the program. We've been chatting about this for a couple of days now, and a critical time, although albeit I wish it was in better circumstances. Before we came up there, you started sharing with me some of the information, the latest we have about this pilot and the aircraft that's been down. What is going on? Can you update us, and how severe is this?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think 3 F-15s had been downed at an earlier point in the war in friendly fire by Kuwaiti air defenses. This is the first incident of an American aircraft being downed by Iranian fire. We're now in the 5th week of the war. Symbolically, it undercuts, I think, the administration argument. And yes, the degradation of Iranian military resources, its ballistic missile inventory, its command and control, its air defenses, much of its conventional military, its drone production and manufacturing, storage facilities, all that is true. But the Iranians maintain capacity still, and it suggests, unless this was a pilot error, that the Iranians still have a capacity. And again, when you have a president that basically is convinced the United States has won dramatically and exponentially, this is a painful reminder that this is a war and that lives are compromised and lost. One American pilot of the 2 apparently has been retrieved by combat rescue. There is still one more missing, and every effort is going to be made to get to that pilot before the Iranians do. And the second, my thoughts, I was in government in '79 during the Carter administration. Downed Americans in Iran being taken hostage was the first or second thing that came to my mind. And it would complicate, to say the least, the victory narrative that the administration has created. So my judgment here, 5 weeks in, is that we're nowhere close to ending this war. There are any number of reasons for that. But I think this is a painful reminder that it is a war.
So, I mean, one of the questions that comes to mind, as I say, I'm a geopolitical, strategic-minded focus. I look at the big picture as much as I try to understand the military developments. Why F-15s? Why are we using F-15s in this? What capacity was it being used in? Doesn't that make them more vulnerable to certain anti-aircraft? Or
there are any number of advanced fighter aircraft with the most advanced and sophisticated avionics: F-22s, F-35s, F-15s. The F-15 may be the workhorse of the American Air Force, and there may be more F-15s in the various fighter wings that have been deployed. I think it's less important that it was an F-15, although I alluded earlier to the fact that several F-15s were shot down at an earlier point in the war by Kuwaiti air defenses. That was friendly fire. So the specifics as to where this aircraft was, what was it doing, what was its mission, unclear. It'll have to wait, assuming there is a detailed military briefing, or one that hasn't occurred already at the Pentagon. I doubt it, but there is one, and we'll be able to learn more.
And when it comes to the Iranian side, one quick take I saw on X earlier was simply that this could be a critical moment for the Iranian side, depending upon how they choose to react. If they do, seem to capture one of the pilots or kill them, that could be a trigger point for more Americans to switch back to supporting the continuation of this conflict. Or you think it's not that way inclined? I mean,
it's hard to say. The Iranian view of their own conduct of this war 5 weeks in is that they are winning, and that they have, objectively speaking, they've successfully deployed geography in an asymmetrical conflict They can't match the Israelis or the American military, who've achieved relative escalation dominance. One aircraft in 5 weeks and no Israeli aircraft is really quite extraordinary, given the numbers of sorties and strikes that these airplanes are flying. But I think the Iranians believe they're winning. From a propaganda point of view, I think they'll, assuming they retrieve the pilot alive, I think they'll milk this in whatever way they possibly can. It'll complicate matters if, in fact, it leads to the pilot actually being wounded or captured. It'll prove to be a painful reminder for the American public. Well, it will not affect, it seems to me, in my own view, the Trump administration's conduct of this war. They are stuck in a situation right now in which there is no exit. Negotiating an end to the war seems to me unlikely. Military escalation is certainly possible, but that raises the question of what are the core objectives of deploying large numbers of ground forces and actually putting Americans in theater rather than conducting what Stan McChrystal called a 30,000-foot war, conducting a six-foot war, where you actually have Americans in the theater vulnerable to Iranian drone missile strikes. So again, my read in this, President said in the speech several days ago that the war would last another 2 to 3 weeks. I think that's a judgment that he may have made it, but I suspect it's going to go on much longer than that.
Oh, you think that we're in for a while yet? Because I sort of, in my limited way, have felt that this wouldn't go beyond April. I just don't feel like there's the appetite for that.
Well, it's April 3rd, right? I mean, we're 5 weeks in. The 3 or 4 core elements that would somehow constitute or reflect an American victory, I think, are nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be found. Number one, the regime is still coherent with the capacity to inflict damage on the Gulf states and to shoot down an American advanced fighter aircraft. Number two, the highly enriched uranium, the 900 pounds located somewhere, Isfahan, Natanz, has not been retrieved, which could be the foundation of an Iranian effort to continue to assemble all the elements of a deliverable nuclear weapon. And number three, the Iranians have demonstrated that they still have the capacity to rocket, drone, and missile the Gulf states. And number four, perhaps the most important thing, is that they've essentially turned the Straits of Hormuz into a toll booth. They'll determine who gets passage and who doesn't, and what they're charged. All of these things strike me 5 weeks in. If the war stopped tomorrow, it would be a major strategic defeat for the United States. And that is why this war of choice, and it was a war of choice, there was no critical, immediate, to quote Oliver Wendell Holmes, in a domestic context, a clear and present danger to launch this war. This war of choice has now turned into a war of necessity. The Iranians have no intention of surrendering their control over the Straits. The administration now has created a situation. Straits are not closed. They're simply open to preferential Iranian decision-making of who gets through and what gets through. And tankers are getting through. Again, that's at the discretion of Tehran. So I don't see how the administration can exit this war without opening those straits. Either negotiating an opening or escalation and doing it by force, and not just opening, by the way, keeping them open, which is the real challenge.
So what U.S. intelligence, I'll come back to the Strait of Hormuz in a second, but from my readings, there was an assessment done by, I think, U.S. intelligence that said about a third of assets on the Iranian side have been destroyed. But that was also varied in level of accuracy, but they sort of, most of it had been moved underground. It wasn't clear whether that was just missiles or production facilities or also launchers. Can you take us through what you think the extent of damage is to the Iranian side?
Yeah, I have no idea. And the press reports that indicated a third of their missile inventory has been destroyed. Maybe true. You can't launch missiles without launchers. Clearly, that's been degraded. I mean, I haven't tracked the daily launch rate to determine whether or not there are fewer now. The question is, again, they do not have to match Israeli or American military dominance. They have identified two fundamentally weak points in the American strategy, and both of them suggest geographic advantage. Geography in the Middle East is destiny. And I think it was Ben Franklin who said that proximity, it was Franklin, he said proximity breeds contempt and children. Well, proximity also breeds vulnerability. The Iranians don't need 3,000 ballistic missiles. They have the capacity to keep the straits open according to their preferences and to deny the Gulf. And we have not even begun to see the amount of civilian infrastructure and oil infrastructure that has yet to be, that the Iranians have yet to strike. And if the president makes good on his threat to basically go after electrical power plants and grids, they destroyed a bridge yesterday. The rationalization was that it was a conduit to facilitate the flow of missile components and weaponry from Tehran to other parts of Iran and vice versa. If he makes good on that threat, the Iranians will strike Gulf infrastructure. The Emiratis are already reporting a natural gas facility that might take a year to restart. So I think we're talking about an asymmetrical conflict where the Iranians have deployed horizontal escalation. And 5 weeks in, they still have capacity.
One of the things that I think, well, it leads to your point, is that the Iranians don't have to launch a lot of missiles just to keep the psychological aspect of warfare in play, right? That people talk about the fact that they're only launching 3 or 4 rockets a day, but I don't think that's the point. They can launch one and it would still be, people still have to be on alert, still in a state of conflict, right? So people talking about the degradation or reduction in strikes, but for me, we don't know the extent to which the Iranian military infrastructure has been destroyed. And the same goes for the Strait of Hormuz and the Navy. There's been a lot of emphasis on the Americans destroying the Navy or the maritime element of the IRGC's capabilities. Do you have any insights on that side and how well
keeping the straits open has little or nothing to do with fast boats or the elements of the Iranian Navy. It has to do with the mining capacity. And there are some reports indicating that there have been mines laid. I'm not sure that's the case. Remember, the straits operate within a 2-mile shipping lane, so it is very easy to mine, and the Iranians know where the mines are. If they're mined, they clearly understand the defender has the advantage. Their capacity to keep the straits open has nothing to do with their efforts to challenge the American Navy, if it came to that, or even the use of their maritime assets. It has to do with the fact that they are capable from coastal areas deep within the country or closer to using short and medium range ballistic missiles to strike tankers. They don't need huge, voluminous barrages of missiles. They just need 2 or 3. Insurance rates come up. Tankers are not prepared to send their vessels through. And I think you've seen that. If in fact, and again, the administration has deployed something under 10,000 sailors, Marines, and paratroopers. Seems to me this will not end without some sort of deployment of ground forces by the United States. Toward what end, I don't know. Options have included retrieval to get the highly enriched uranium, taking Kharg Island. There are 2 or 3 islands. Larak Island guards the opening of the straits on the west. There is a larger island, Kashem Island, which has been very well fortified. I think taking these islands is the easy part. Holding them in response to the latent capacity that the Iranians have in exposing American forces. And again, it's not a question of just opening the straits, it's keeping them open. Mm-hmm. That would require, presumably, as the U.S. did in 87 and 88 during the reflagging tanker episodes where the U.S. Navy reflagged Kuwaiti tankers. That requires several destroyers flanking an individual tanker. That's going to take a long time to resume pre-war oil flow through the straits, which is roughly what, a fifth of the world's of the global need for oil and natural gas, by the way, which cannot be exported through pipelines. The Qataris export 25% of the world's LNG, and the only way to get that LNG out is through tankers, not through pipelines. And that LNG is critically important to producing ammonia, which is critically important for fertilizer. You've seen fertilizer prices in Asia go way up. You have 60 million people in this region. Mostly these countries are dependent on food imports. Those prices are going to, supplies are going to dwindle and prices are going to rise. So again, it comes down to, I think, an asymmetrical conflict. And so far, the headlines of that asymmetry seem to represent the trend lines with respect to Iran's capacity. You want to fundamentally change the situation, then you consider doing in Iraq. Then you deploy 250,000 American forces on the ground in a country roughly of 91 million people. Geography will not be kind. This is not Iraq. There are mountainous areas in this country. And it's the two longest wars in history, where the standard for victory was never could we win, but when would we leave and what would we leave behind? So I'm at a loss, frankly, to understand the logic of the deployment of ground forces. What objectives are they going to achieve? Can they get the uranium? The 900 pounds contained in large scuba-sized tanks? Can they open the straits? Can they change the regime? So far, victory for the U.S. would have to include some of those elements.
Mm. So a couple of questions on what you mentioned before. So tankers that have been coming through and this idea of a toll booth. Earlier today, there's been reports about some French registered ships or flag flying ships coming through. And it seems to me like the Iranians are sort of undertaking a rather unique strategy here, which is sort of getting more European countries to shun the US or prevent America from using their basis for whatever relations to the war as a way to say, okay, now you can come through. Do you think that could be the case, or it's?
I mean, I think the Europeans are in a bind, right? I mean, they're scared of Donald Trump. They need things from him. On one hand, their publics will not tolerate offensive European involvement. NATO is a defensive alliance, Article 5 notwithstanding. This was a war of choice. The United States attacked Iran. NATO is not going to contribute its forces. Macron has been leading an effort of some 30 countries in order to consider seriously the implications of a post-conflict European role with respect to the Straits, post-conflict. And I think that is something that I can imagine. Donald Trump has made it unmistakably clear that the U.S. is not going to participate in this. And he said in his speech, we don't need their oil. The Europeans can buy the oil from us. And he challenged the Europeans to seize the Straits. We've weakened the Iranians. Today, he said, we will open the Straits and take the oil. So, I mean, this is strategic improvisation in a sort of if it wasn't so serious, didn't involve the loss of human life, it would be laughable.
Yeah, no, what it's doing for what remains of the transatlantic relationship, less alone just NATO, I think is rather tragic. The British government is meant to be hosting another sort of get together of about 35 nations in the next couple of days or week, I think. Do you think that there could be some kind of European coalition that genuinely does this? Because their biggest concern is the murkiness between international maritime law versus getting bogged down in a conflict, a war of choice that they don't want anything to do with.
Yeah, I think it depends on how the war ends, and what sort of opportunities there would be for a post-conflict environment in which all kinetic activity would stop. That is to say, the war would end on terms that normal humans would regard a cessation of hostilities. And it's just impossible to make these predictions because I think we're, as the Brits would say, a long way from Tipperary for sure.
You got some great historical quotes, Aaron. Love it. Haven't heard that one in a while. Okay, I did want to ask you a little bit more is about the Gulf states. There's been a lot of speculation about contingency plans, building a pipeline, developing even a sort of maritime access route, which is obviously, I think, rather ridiculous. But sort of what are the Saudis doing? What do you think they could do? What does this do for the Saudi-Emirati relationship, which was obviously pretty bad after the situation in Yemen in January? Where do you think that this could go?
I think the Saudis are terrified that their entire future has now been compromised. I think they're angry at the United States. I think they're angry at the Israelis. The Emiratis less so. They have a much closer relationship with the Israelis. But the Emirates have to be doing some serious thinking about American strategic capacity here. They invested heavily in trying to find Chinese brokered 2022 and sort of détente, relaxation of tensions between Iran and the Gulf states. The Omanis and the Qataris have a somewhat, I wouldn't say charitable view, but a more sort of expansive view of how they could continue to maintain their relationship with Iran. I don't think any of the Gulf states, although the Emiratis have now maybe the only Gulf state that has offered to participate in trying to open the straits, should that become necessary. But I think they are all very reluctant to, even now, when they are incredibly angry and traumatized by what the Iranians have done, they don't want to enter this war as offensive parties to it. There are other shoes, by the way, that have not yet dropped. The Saudis have the East-West pipeline with a surge capacity of 7 million barrels. Normal pipeline flow is 5 million. It's east-west, right? It goes from Abqaiq in the east to Yanbu in the Red Sea. The Houthis last week basically launched a few missiles at Israel. All were intercepted. If the Houthis chose to resume their activities in the Red Sea, you have a situation where the Bab el-Mandeb would be closed, and that would mean that those 7 million barrels would either going to Asia, that would be blocked, and the only recourse would be through the Suez Canal to Europe. I think that, again, you'd have two choke points, not just one. And again, another blow, I think, to the Gulf states' notion that they saw themselves as essentially becoming a tourist hub, a business and financial hub, and a cultural hub. I think all of that now is up in the air. Maybe investors won't have many other places to put their money in the wake of this conflict. But I think the future of the Gulf states is very much, in terms of their own conception of their future, at risk. Because if the regime survives, and we have no indication, none, that there is either internal fracture or you are seeing large-scale demonstrations and the instruments of state repression are cracking. If the regime survives, it's going to be an angry, bitter regime.
Well, I want to ask you about that at the end, but I have a couple of questions beforehand that I'd be interested in your take. Just on the Gulf of Aden and the Horn, because I was reading an interesting report. I lived in Kenya for a bit. I worked in the Greater Horn region for a while. And what I became aware of was the growing relationship between Al-Shabaab and the Houthis. And something that makes me curious is if the Houthis were to enter, would you see Al-Shabaab getting involved? Could you see the entirety of that broader Greater Horn of Africa being pulled in? And so suddenly we have a conflict that spans two continents, or two regions. I don't know if you're far-fetched.
No, I mean, I think Shabaab and Al-Qaeda derivatives will continue to operate in response to capitalize on all sorts of local factors that have nothing to do with what's happening now. Right. Corruption, authoritarian governments, local disputes. I don't see that as a major problem. I think, and a lot of these costs have already been built in because 2023 to 2025, till the ceasefire, the Houthis had raised shipping rates and forced supply chain commercial shippers to spend additional 3 weeks transitioning or transiting the Cape of Good Hope around Africa. So I don't see that happening.
Okay. No, I mean, there was quite a notable UN report that came out in November, so I was just curious for your take. Now, you mentioned China, and as always, everyone likes to talk about World War III, which I think is absurd, but, we have to think about the other players in this. What's your assessment of, to the extent that the Chinese especially, I think it's pretty clear the Russians are involved or supporting Iran with intelligence. Where do you think China is in this? What is that?
I don't think they're happy about the situation. Their major source of imported oil is from Saudi and Iran, but they prepared for this. They have over 1 billion barrels in reserve. They don't like the prospects of becoming dependent on Russian oil, which may well happen. But they're also picking up a lot of advantages. I mean, Asia is suffering, and it's suffering because of a war of choice foisted upon the international community by the United States and by what China has tried to expose as an unreliable American ally. I think they pick up points. There's a lot of distrust of China for obvious reasons, but I do think they pick up points there. Every Tomahawk missile and cruise missile that's launched, every American munition that's expended in the Gulf is one that is less serviceable for the Asia Pacific, for Taiwan. I don't think that Xi is on the cusp of ordering a blockade or an amphibious invasion of Taiwan, but I think the fact that the U.S. is still bogged down in the Middle East when successive administrations, including this one, have sought to pivot to the Asia Pacific, that's an advantage for China, a big advantage.
But what does it do for the Saudis, the petrodollar, the relationship to the United States in a broader grand strategic sense?
I mean, look, the Chinese have no security assets to compete with the United States in the Middle East. It's economic investment, it's financial. Their infrastructure, to the extent they funded it, some of it in the Gulf is being destroyed. But I think if you really want, I think they're mixed. There's a sort of mixed advantages, disadvantage for the Chinese. But we have this conception, my colleague at Carnegie, Evan Weigenbaum, has written about this. We sort of mirror image. We think just because China describes Saudi Arabia or Iran as an ally, that somehow they're obligated to expend vital Chinese capital or resources on those allies. They're not. And I think that's doubly true for Russia. You saw it in Armenia, you saw it in Syria, you saw it in Iraq, and now you see it in Iran. The big winner here is not China. There are downsides, as we've noted. The big winner here, almost without hesitation or reservation, is Vladimir Putin. He's filling his coffers with hundreds of millions of dollars. We've desanctioned Russian oil. The Ukraine is now even more of a footnote in American strategy. The Chinese are going to become more dependent on Russian oil and hydrocarbons. And the U.S. is now bogged down. I think Putin is laughing all the way to the bank.
Well, we come
and I might add, the Russians are providing, and there's some indication the Chinese have as well. The Iranians don't have good satellite coverage here. The Russians are providing in real time targeting information that is being used by Iran to kill Americans.
But what does that do for the US-Russo relationship or Trump?
Donald Trump is obviously prepared to do a carve-out.
Okay, well, we'll have to have a deeper dive on that with you another time, Aaron. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on the Russo dynamics more broadly. But I guess my last question for you, and for everyone watching, I will be staying on the stream, Aaron. You're welcome to join off, but we'll be being joined by another professor from the Middle East Institute in about half an hour. But my last question for you, Aaron, of course, you're welcome to stay with us, Aaron, if you want to have a good old back and forth with a colleague just down the road in Washington. But my last question is about, obviously, Iran. I want to bring it full circle back to the Iranian leadership. Mojtaba has not been seen. He's not shared even any audio. Everything he's shared, which is not much, has only been in written statements. So some people are saying he's just a vegetable. Right, that the IRGC are ultimately the winners here, or the directors of where we're going. And so I have a two-pronged question for you. Firstly, what does that mean? Can you take us through a little bit more what IRGC is in this instance, in a war footing of this level? But second, does this effectively mean that Iran becomes a much more militarized police state, and an even worse one than what we've seen in the past? Yeah. Because Khanem, as you said, you were in government in '79, and the difference I've seen in my understanding, service level to you, is how much more pragmatic Iran has become over time. Khanem almost kept the IRGC in check in a theocratic sense, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd love you to unpack.
Every Iranian expert, and I'm not one, and I don't play one on TV, basically has said that, yes, this is going to continue the shift, which had been increasing, from what one analyst said is divine power to hard power. Mojtaba may be incapacitated, he may be dead, he may be in a Russian hospital, who knows? But the IRGC, Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, controls the three things you need to run Iran: oil, money, and guns. There is no effective opposition. There doesn't appear to be any fragmentation within the conventional career Iranian military or within the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps. Ali Khamenei, the late supreme leader, prepared for this by decentralizing, by layering decision-making. I think decision-making in Iran is fraught right now. The Israelis or the Americans, Israelis, I suspect, in the main, have killed senior level national security officials. Ali Larijani is one, and others who might have had more authority to make decisions. My colleague at Carnegie, Karim Sajapur, said that Trump was looking for an Iranian Delcy Rodriguez, but what he got was an Iranian Kim Jong-un, and not just one Kim Jong-un. He got a couple. So I think that's right. You're going to end up with the military in charge of running an authoritarian government, and the diminishment of clerical power, what I call the malocracy. Yeah, I think that's taken place. And what is it going to mean? More oppression? Acceleration to get a nuke? I mean, Iran, before this war, was a nuclear weapons threshold state. It had all the elements and the ingredients and all of the scientific knowledge, should it decide to produce a bomb, to do so. Kim Jong-un, several weeks ago, you should dig it out, I think, issued a statement in which he more or less was crowing and validating the fact that North Korea has deliverable nuclear weapons. The implication being, you see what happens if you don't have them. That might have been true of Gaddafi, it might have been true of Saddam, and it might have been true of the current government of Ukraine, had it not given up its weapons or negotiated them away. So I can't imagine, unless you believe in a sort of Leninist dialectic in which, yes, it's more hardline. Yes, there'll be more repression. Yes, the administration has, this one, Trump, has done extraordinary damage. It's going to be difficult for the IRGC to run this country now. They've alienated half the world by closing or deciding who gets through the straits and who doesn't. And then over time, this will create a dialectic which will in fact create reaction, which will lead to what? A cracking of the regime. But right now, seems to me, the IRGC are soundly in control. And again, whoever said we've shifted from divine power to hard power or harder power was right, is right.
But if I can just get your quick take before you leave us, what does that mean? An Iran that is highly internalized, what does it mean for Gulf states? What does it mean for its foreign policy? How does the world or the Middle East manage an Iran that is relatively much weaker than it was years back to one that is highly radicalized and militarized like that?
I mean, it will try to rebuild its support for its proxies, particularly Hezbollah. The Houthis don't fit the classic definition of a proxy. They don't operate according to Iran's road control, but the Houthis will remain a partner, certainly, of the Iranians. So you can expect that. And the Israelis, Israel is going to occupy 10% of Lebanon, which could create another reaction. It's going to be made very difficult for the Lebanese government to move against Hezbollah, given the damage that the Israelis are doing, and the number of civilians are being killed. So Iran will continue to have advantages. And the big one is geography. They've deployed geography. And anyone, I spent 5 years in the intelligence community. Anyone would have to ask themselves the question, did anyone make a compelling case based on geography that this war would not go the way the president of the United States thought it would go? I'm sure CIA or INR analysts presented that view. Whether it got to the president, whether he cared, whether any of his advisors chose to make that argument in a compelling way, it's unclear to me. But the Iranians have it, and they've used it effectively.
It sounds like a pretty clear Pyrrhic victory on the side of the US government then. But Aaron Miller, thank you very much for your time on this live podcast conversation. It's been absolutely...
It was great to be here with you, and we'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely. But I'll speak to you soon. And everyone,